President Bashar al-Assad threatens to bomb Lebanon. 2 years ago today, Syrian protesters took to the streets in the days of rage. Since then, 70,000 are believed to be dead. Hundreds of thousands have been displaced. For the first time since the start of the war, just this week, France and Britain weighed arming the Syrian opposition. So what now? Joining me now from Winnipeg is Director of the Canadian Arab Federation, Mohamed El Rashidy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Hannah.
And from our Washington studio, Amal Mudallali, a senior scholar at the Wilson Center. Now, Mr. Rashidy, do you think the EU will comply with the request by France and Britain to drop the ban on supplying arms to the Syrian opposition?
No, I'm not sure that they will comply. I think what we're looking at is actions that will be covert. I think it has already begun. I think the supply of arms has begun to flow through to the rebels, and I think different countries will find different means of doing it. What's being created, or at least attempted right now, is to have a consensus on an international level with a larger group of countries to come together. I don't think that that's going to happen on the short term, however.
Now, Ms. Mudallali, the Canadian government shares the same concerns as the Americans in the risks of arming the rebels. How is the U.S. reacting to this push from the UK and France?
You know, the United States recently, you can see from, especially during the trip of Mr. Kerry in the region, you can see that the United States is softening its position about letting others arm the rebels. Before they did not want to arm them, and they did not want to give anything which is not non-lethal, but now they're changing their position on letting others. I think they turned to the other side and letting others doing it, because I think the most important idea is that after 2 years, the international community and the United States and Britain and France, they realized that there is no political solution possible without changing the balance of power on the ground, because Mr. Assad still believes that he can win. And as long as he can win, he thinks he can win, there is no political solution or no prospect for a political solution. So I think the push now is for a political solution, but to reach that solution, you have to change things on the ground and the balance of power in favor of the opposition, so that the political solution is possible and people can come to the table. The other concern I think that they have is that the longer this conflict is taking, the more extremists are having more influence in the conflict. So to contain that influence of the extremists, to counter that influence, they want to have the moderates in the rebels, they want them to have more arms, they want them to have a better training. And there were stories today actually from Amman that there are people who are being trained by the United States. The State Department today would not confirm it, but I think everybody understands that the United States is doing more than what they're telling us publicly they're doing.
But is there a danger in just sitting back and arming the rebels?
Well, the problem is the Americans are saying that the French president has said it today, that why we're not arming the rebels, the others are doing that, are arming, not the rebels, the others are arming the regime. So the Russians are arming the regime, Hezbollah is helping the regime, the Iranians are arming the regime. So they see that there is imbalance in the equation. And as long as you have this imbalance, you're not going to have these two parties coming to the table. Both of them, or one of them at least, has to understand that he cannot win militarily, that he has to have a political solution. And to convince him to do that, they have to change the balance of power on the ground.
Mr. Rashidy, Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, John Baird, had this to say in a statement. Take a look. Canada continues to stand with the people of Syria in this very dark period. We have acted with like-minded countries, and Canada stands ready to do more. We look forward to a day when the bloodshed has ended and the work of building a peaceful, democratic, pluralistic Syria can begin. Now, what more do you think Canada could do to help to end this crisis?
Oh, well, with all due respect to the Honourable Minister, I think Canada has played itself out of any leadership roles in the Middle East. That's a given, and those aren't just my reading of the situation.
Why is that?
Well, obviously, the direction that the Harper administration or government has gone over the last few years has totally if you will, has totally weakened Canada's position. Canada historically obviously had a role as a peacekeeper and a pioneer as a peacekeeper in the region, and Harper himself doesn't view Canada as a peacekeeping nation. He's taken it in a different direction. So we're not respected in that sense, and I don't think Canada will have any effective role. So we can say whatever we want out of Canada, but I think we've become very, very irrelevant. If you wanna look at the reality on the ground, I think what Amal has stated is very accurate. And I think that at the end of the day, when I was listening to Evan earlier talking about the legacy of the Iraq War, and this is part of the reason why Canada is irrelevant, because today's Canadian government supported the Iraq War. And what we're seeing happening in Syria, a lot of the fighters that were in Iraq, and ironically were supported by the Bashar al-Assad regime, have now come into Syria and are fighting the Syrian regime. And this is really the concern on the long term. You have these fighters that have become seasoned, they've become trained in these very harsh environments, and once the conflict in Syria ends, if it does, and it won't for at least another year, I would say, they're gonna look to go somewhere else. And this is the legacy that started with the Iraq War, and initially, obviously, the Afghanistan invasion by the Soviets. And we keep having this circle going around and really just sending them to different places around the world, wreaking havoc. And I think that's why the arming of the rebels is very dangerous. But I think there's something much more dangerous than arming them, and that is the training and the know-how that they gain on a battlefield like Syria. And it's a very delicate situation, and I think that the long term is going to get much, much uglier than the short term.
So what do you think Canada needs to do?
Like I said, Canada, there's not much Canada can do. I think when you play yourself into a corner, as Canada has done, you're not going to be able to contribute on an international scale. Perhaps from a humanitarian perspective, definitely Canada can provide help. We can take in some of the refugees. We've reached 1 million now. I mean, we're talking this situation has gotten so bad, the numbers of people suffering are in the millions. It's incredible. So we can help on that front. That's something Canada has the know-how to do, and I think we should do it. I think the humanitarian aspect is very alarming. It's very difficult to look at this just from a political perspective and ignore what the population